Great to see you all tonight. Got a good crowd assembled together to study from God's Word, and that's always an encouragement. We're studying Old Testament characters in this Wednesday night class, and there's just so much to learn from Old Testament characters, both good ones and bad ones. We've got one tonight. I don't know how you want to rate him. We're going to talk about Samson tonight. You want to rate him as a good, worthy Bible character, or maybe not so much. There's some real issues with Samson, aren't there? And so we're going to talk about Samson tonight. We start out in Judges chapter 13. If you follow along, if you have your study guide, that's great. If not, you can just follow along with us as we look to these scriptures. Starting out in Judges chapter 13, it says in verse 1, "And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines 40 years. And so that was the situation. Now we know, and we've studied it in the Old Testament lots of times, that it was just sort of a roller coaster ride with the Israelites. They'd get down low and oppressed. God would allow their enemies to overrun them and just take advantage of them, oppress them severely. They would cry out to God. God would send a deliverer. In this era, the deliverers were the judges. God would send these deliverers, and they would come back, and they'd be faithful for a while, and it wasn't long until they were back down again. And so it was just a repeated history in the Old Testament. We're in one of those low valleys right now. They have sinned, and God has allowed them. Notice, it actually says the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines 40 years. And so God allowed the Philistines to have this dominance over them. We talk a lot of times when we're reading in the Bible text about these national developments, these developments between nations. And we have the advantage here of divine revelation. You know, if something happened today and one nation overtook another nation, we might say, I wonder if God's hand was in that. I wonder if providentially God caused that to happen. And we would never be able to say for sure because we don't have that direct revelation. But in this instance, we know for sure that the reason it happened was because God caused it to happen. God delivered them into the hand of the Philistines 40 years. So in that setting and with that sort of situation in place, we read about this new guy, this new man, this one who will ultimately be a judge and a deliverer for the Israelites. Verse 2, there was a certain man of Zorah of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and bare not. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman and said unto her, Behold, now thou art barren and bearest not, but thou shalt conceive and bear a son. Now therefore beware, I pray thee, and drink not wine nor strong drink, and eat not any unclean thing. For lo, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come on his head. For the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. And so even before he was conceived, the divine revelation was, this is the one who will deliver. This one is the one who will deliver deliver the people out of the hand of the Philistines. Kind of interesting about the Nazarite vow. And we know that the Nazarite vow, it was typically a vow that men took that was just temporary in nature. Our author mentions, I didn't check him up on this, but our author mentions that a Nazarite vow might possibly last for 30 to 100 days. But in some instances, the Nazarite vow was lifelong, and that seems to be the case here with Samson. Can you think of any others that the indication is that they were Nazarites their whole life? Wade? Yeah, I think John the Baptist. Look in Luke chapter 1, verse 15. In Luke chapter 1, verse 15, he shall be great in this is when Zacharias was being told about the birth of John the Baptist. He shall be great in the sight of the Lord, and shall drink neither wine nor strong drink, and he shall be filled with the Holy Ghost, even from his mother's womb. It doesn't say Nazarite, but you got to think that's probably what is meant there. I was thinking also of Samuel. Look in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 11. When Hannah was praying to the Lord, 1 Samuel 1, verse 11, she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thy handmaid and remember me, and not forget thy handmaid, but will give unto thy handmaid a man-child, then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. And so it seems like, again, the term Nazarite's not used there, but it seems like that's probably an indication that Samuel was a lifelong Nazarite. Some of the things that was expected of a Nazarite. Let's look at Numbers chapter 6. In Numbers chapter 6, verse 3, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink, shall drink no vinegar of wine or vinegar of strong drink, neither shall he drink any liquor of grapes, nor eat moist grapes or dried. All the days of his separation shall he eat nothing that is made of the vine tree, from the kernels even to the husk. And so complete abstinence from not only strong drink, but anything associated with grapes. Verse 5, all the days of the vows of his separation there shall no razor come upon his head until the days be fulfilled, in the which he separated himself unto the Lord. He shall be holy and shall let the locks of his hair of his head grow. Verse 6, all the days of his separation, all the days that he separateth himself to the Lord, he shall come at no dead body. Now, I think probably the main ramification of that would be even if he had a family member who died, he wouldn't be able to associate in the conducting the funeral, the preparation of the body, or anything like that, because he had taken the Nazarite vow. Now here in Judges 13, we go back to our text now, Judges 13, there's one other thing that's mentioned that I think is just practically redundant. It said, the Lord said to Samson's mother, thou shalt conceive, shall bear a son, no razor shall come on his head for the child. See. No, I'm thinking about the end of verse 4. I pray thee, drink not wine nor strong drink, and eat not any unclean thing. Well, you would think a faithful Jew, a faithful Hebrew, a faithful Israelite wasn't going to eat unclean things anyway. So that almost seemed like a redundant requirement. But it is stated there in chapter 13, verse 4. So this got to be startling revelation to Manoah and his wife. I mean, they're barren, childless. Now suddenly there's going to be a child, and these indications about not only him being a Nazarite, but being a deliverer of Israel. That's got to be amazing thing to grow up into. You know, can you imagine a 3, 4, 5-year-old child being told you can't do what the other kid's doing? I'm not going to cut your hair because you got a vow. I hadn't even thought about that, but that would be a hard thing. Yeah, exactly right. All right, now, as the text goes on there, Samson's father expresses a concern. Verse 6, the woman came and told her husband, saying, a man of God came unto me, and his countenance was like the countenance of an angel of God, very terrible. But I asked him not whence he was, neither told he me his name. But he said to me, behold, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and now drink no wine nor strong drink, neither eat any unclean thing, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death. Then Manoah entreated the Lord and said, O my Lord, let the man of God which thou didst send come again to us, and teach us what we should do unto the child that shall be born. So this is kind of interesting, because Manoah does not express doubt that the vision that his wife had seen the man of God, the messenger from God. He doesn't express doubt. He doesn't express doubt about the fact that she was going to conceive and bear a child. I think it's really interesting. His concern was, let the man of God come back and tell us how to raise this child. You know, that was his concern, which is really a noble request, I think. And for all who are parents, especially fathers here, that's the thing. Teach us how to raise our children. Of course, in this instance, he was asking for a direct messenger from God. We have a message from God, and God has given us information. We need to learn it and follow it. But that's a noble concern. How shall we raise this child? I think that's really a worthy thought on his part. Any comments here? All right, let's go on. So, when we get into the next chapter, Samson decides he wants a wife. In Judges 14, beginning verse 1, Samson went down to Timnath and saw a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. And he came up and told his father and his mother and said, I have seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me to wife. Then his father and his mother said to him, Is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren or among all my people that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she pleases me well. But his father and mother knew not that it was of the Lord that he sought an occasion against the Philistines, for at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. I think here you begin to see a side of Samson that we don't like so well. A side of Samson that's not so honorable. We remember that the children of Israel, specifically in the law of Moses, were not to marry outside the nation of Israel. Right? And so this would be directly violating the law of God in regards to marrying this woman. It has to be significant that she was also a Philistine. That would be particularly troublesome to the parents. Not only is she not an Israelite, she's a daughter of the Philistines. And so they were really bothered and worried about that. Again, I think it's a reasonable parental concern. Who our children marry. There's actually not a single thing that will impact our children's lives probably more than the people they marry. And so that's a reasonable concern. And Manoah says the right thing here. Is there not someone among God's people that you could marry? But he doesn't push the issue. He doesn't force the issue. And he actually allows Samson to sort of dictate, you go get her for me. She's the one I want. You get her for me. And that sort of demanding attitude toward his father is not very appealing in Samson, but it's also a failure on Manoah's part that he actually contributed to that situation. But notice again, we have the advantage of revelation here. His father did not know that it was of the Lord, for he sought an occasion against the Philistines. In other words, God's going to use this development. Now, we could go to the question that we've talked about in class recently about free will. Could Samson have married properly? Could he have married in accordance with the will of God? Could he have chosen to marry an Israelite? Or was he forced and locked into marrying this Philistine woman because God was going to use? I'm a strong advocate in the notion of free will. But God, what this is telling us is God's going to use this. God can use. So this is actually a violation of the will of God, right? That Samson should marry a Philistine. But God can use even the wrong things people do and bring it about to accomplish or fulfill His will. And I think that's what we've got here. I don't think Samson was predestined in this matter. I think he clearly made a choice. The indication is that God's going to use that choice to accomplish something He wants to accomplish. Any thoughts on that?
He was going to be. And He was going to determine to use that person that Samson was going to be to accomplish His goals and His ends. And so that's what it's telling us here that He was doing. Not that God wanted Samson to marry a Philistine woman in sin, or not that He forced him to, but He knew Samson would and how this is going to turn out. So He was going to use that circumstance to God's advantage.
I think you're right. We had our virtual Bible study last Thursday night. We talked about this at length. And it's almost a mind-blowing kind of discussion. If God predicts the future, does he cause the future to happen that way? And the classic example, and we're not going to go there. We're not going to talk about all this. But the classic example is Judas Iscariot. Jesus predicted that Judas would betray him. Did God therefore force Judas to betray him? That again, I think our little bird brains, our finite pea brains, can't fathom the infinite God. And you know, we're all locked into time and space. Everything happens in its time. Everything happens where were you yesterday at this time? That's the way we live. God is not bound by space and time. And so we just can't think on his level, and we just have to accept that God can foretell the future without altering man's free will. Now, you might want to make a note in your margin there where we're studying in Judges 14 about Samson wanting this foreign wife. You might make a note there, Deuteronomy 7, verse 2. The Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, talking about their enemies, the other nations. Thou shalt smite them, utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them. Neither shalt thou make marriages with them. Thy daughter thou shalt not give unto his son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son. For they will turn away thy son from following, that they may serve other gods. So will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you and destroy thee suddenly. And so concerning the other nations, there was specific instruction. You're not to marry these other nations. Samson was determined to do so. Again, not so great on the part of Samson. And you have to lay blame at Manoah's feet for being a participant in that, or an enabler at least, in that happening. Monty?
I say Manoah bears a lot of the responsibility here, because you just read the passage where it says you're not supposed to give their daughters for your sons. Well, here he's going to go and do it. What he should have done was stood up and said, no, I'm not going to get this foreign woman for you. You're going to marry an Israelite woman, and that's the end of it.
Yeah, they should. Yeah. All right, let's read just a little bit further. Let's keep reading there. Chapter 14 of Judges. Then went Samson down and his father and his mother to Timnath, and came to the vineyards of Timnath. And behold, a young lion roared against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he rent him as he would have rent a kid. And he had nothing in his hand, but he told not his father and his mother what he had done. And he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. And after a time he returned to take her, and he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. Behold, there was a swarm of bees and honey in the carcass of the lion. And he took thereof in his hand, and went on eating, and came to his father and mother, and he gave them, and they did eat. But he told not them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. So his father went down unto the woman, and Samson made there a feast, for so used the young men to do. And it came to pass, when they saw him, that they brought 30 companions to be with him. And Samson said to them, I will now put forth a riddle unto you. If you can certainly declare it me within the 7 days of the feast, and find it out, then I will give you 30 sheets and 30 changes of garments. But if you cannot declare it me, then you shall give me 30 sheets and 30 changes of garment. And they said to him, Put forth thy riddle, that we may hear it. And he said to them, Out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. And they could not in 3 days expound the riddle. And so here's, again, this whole thing shouldn't have been happening anyway, but now Samson's getting himself in deeper by putting forth this riddle before these Philistine young men, challenging them to prove his or solve his riddle. Verse 15, it came to pass on the 7th day that they said unto Samson's wife, Entice thy husband, that he may declare unto us the riddle, lest we burn thee and thy father's house with fire. Have ye called us to take that we have? Is it not so? And Samson's wife wept before him and said, Thou dost but hate me and lovest me not. Thou hast put forth a riddle unto the children of my people, and hast not told it me. And he said unto her, Behold, I have not told it my father or my mother, and shall I tell it thee? And she wept before him the 7 days while their feast lasted. And it came to pass on the 7th day that he told her, because she lay sore upon him. And she told the riddle to the children of her people. And the men of the city said unto him on the 7th day before the sun went down, What is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? And he said unto them, if ye had not plowed with my heifer, ye had not found out my riddle. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he went down to Askelon, and slew 30 men of them, and took their spoil, and gave change of garments to them which expounded the riddle. And his anger was kindled, and he went up to his father's house. But Samson's wife was given to his companion, whom he had used as his friend. We know that story really well, but it's still it's always interesting when you come back over those sort of familiar episodes. And that expression, you talk about a politically incorrect expression. If you had not plowed with my heifer, you had not solved my riddle, he says. And he knows the only reason they got the solution to the riddle was because they had forced his wife to reveal it. There's probably tons of lessons there, but again, what happened at the end of that was that God used Samson to afflict the Philistines. And with his powerful hand, he slew 30 men of the Philistines, took their garments and gave it to the other Philistines. And so this pattern is developing in the case of Samson. Again, Samson is held out as an example of faith. You know, in Hebrews chapter 11, of course, we know Hebrews chapter 11 very well for all the great heroes of faith that are mentioned there. Near the end of that catalog of great men of faith in Hebrews chapter 11, at verse 32, the Hebrew writer says, what shall I say more? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon and of Barak and of Samson and of Jephthah, of David also, and Samuel, and of the prophets. And so he's included there in Hebrews chapter 11 as a man of faith. But boy, he sure had his flaws. He definitely had his flaws. Thoughts or comments? Yeah.
You know, talking about flaws, wasn't it a flaw for him to take that money from that carpet, that line, and give it to Ethan, and then give it some to his mom and dad?
What do you...
You know, the Marcus.
Oh, because he had the Nazarite vow.
Yeah.
They weren't supposed to eat honey.
The Nazarites weren't supposed to eat honey. Okay, I hadn't even thought about that. Saying, and out of a dead body on top of that. I had thought about that. Interesting tie-in, Gordon. Good point. All right. Let's keep reading into chapter 15. And Samson is determined, in all these episodes, he's determined to get, it seems clear he's determined to seek personal vengeance. Let's read in 15. It came to pass within a while after, in the time of wheat harvest, that Samson visited his wife with a kid and said, I will go into my wife into the chamber. But her father would not suffer him to go in. And her father said, I verily thought that thou hast utterly hated her. Therefore I gave her to thy companion. Is not her younger sister fairer than she? Take her, I pray thee, instead of her. And Samson said concerning them, now shall I be more blameless than the Philistines, though I do them a displeasure. And Samson went and caught 300 foxes, and took firebrands, and turned tail to tail, and put a firebrand in the midst between two tails. And when he had set the brands on fire, he let them go into the standing corn of the Philistines, and burnt up both the shocks and the standing corn with the vineyards and the olives. When the Philistines said, who had done this? They answered, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he had taken his wife and given her to his companion. And the Philistines came up and burnt her and her father with fire. And Samson said unto them, though ye have done this, yet will I be avenged of you, and after that I will cease. And he smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter, and he went down and dwelt in the top of the rock Etam. Probably it's worthwhile making some comments about personal vengeance. It seems clear that Samson was heavily into that. that was a strong motivator in these episodes. Again, God's using that. God's going to use it. Samson is a vengeful man. We're not supposed to be vengeful men. But God's going to use that trait of Samson to afflict the Philistines. He intends to afflict the Philistines. If Samson wasn't there to do it, it would have been accomplished in some other way. He's going to deliver the Israelites. And if Samson doesn't do it, someone else will. But Samson's doing it. Now, whenever we talk about personal vengeance, someone could take that Old Testament storyline maybe and say, well, there's Samson. And boy, he was heavily into personal vengeance. And if they did him wrong, he's gonna double it back on them and more. Probably it's okay if I do that too. If someone does me dirty, look out, because I'm going to get even with them, and I'm going to make sure that they suffer more than I did. That was Samson's mentality. It's not the mentality that God wills for us. Romans 12:19, dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thy enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing, thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. So, clearly, we would not want to imitate Samson's example in these episodes. Wade?
Yeah, so in verse 11 said that they brought 3,000 men down to take him up. If we fill this whole auditorium, what's the capacity of this auditorium? 245 people. And they brought 3,000 men. That's almost 10 times, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
10 times what we could fill this auditorium with, just to capture one man. They were really afraid of him.
Yeah. Rightfully so.
Yeah.
Rightfully so, yeah. Amon?
As we think about the personal vengeance, we see every episode here as we look at Samson, he goes and takes vengeance of it. They find out his riddle, he goes and kills 30 men, takes his clothes and goes off mad. His wife gets given away. He finds out about that, he burns their fields down. His wife gets burned alive, killed. Every time he takes personal vengeance, it costs him dearly. And so when people want to make that excuse, well, if Samson did it, it's okay. Do you want to pay like Samson did? That's something, there's consequences for everything we do in life. Good consequences or bad, depending on if we've done good or bad. Samson is doing a lot of bad stuff here, and he's paying with a lot of bad consequences in his life personally for it. And so we need to take that example into consideration too, that vengeance doesn't work out good for us. And like the passage you read, we need to let God handle the vengeance. He says that belongs to him. That's in his purview. It's his territory. I need to leave that alone. My job is just try to live right. And if it's pretty bad, God's going to take care of it. It's not my place.
I really like that observation. It did, we have an expression, so how's that working out for you? And you'd like to ask Samson, how's this personal vengeance thing working out for you? It's not working out so good. Because every time he does something, they do something bad, it just keeps escalating and snowballing. Tina?
On the marriage thing, I always been a little confused about that. They had the ceremony, obviously, but had they not come together as man and wife, and so the daddy felt like that Samson had just deserted her, so it was null and void, or...
I can't answer that. I don't know, and it doesn't say, but don't forget that these Philistines are pagans. And so they're not strongly bound by moral principles anyway. So she's a Philistine, and Philistines are pagan people. So I don't think we don't know. We don't know what his thinking was. But he says, what we do know is what he says there. He says, I thought you hated her. Verse 2, 15:2, I verily thought that thou hadst utterly hated her. And so I gave her to your companion. So that was his thinking. But whether he believed it was morally right or not, I don't know. I don't think we could argue any justification one way or the other on that. Anybody else? Okay. So this account in chapter 15 goes on. Verse 9, the Philistines went up and pitched in Judah and spread themselves in Lehi. And the men of Judah said, why art thou come up against us? And they answered, to bind Satan we are come up, to do to him as he had done to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah went to the top of the rock of Etam and said to Samson, knowest thou not that the Philistines are rulers over us? What is this that thou hast done unto us? And he said to them, as they did to me, so I have done to them. And they said to him, we are come down to bind thee, that we may deliver thee into the hand of the Philistines. And Samson said unto them, swear unto me that you will not fall upon me yourselves. And they spake unto him, saying, no, but we will bind thee fast and deliver thee into their hands. But surely we will not kill thee. And they bound him with 2 new cords and brought him up from the rock. And so the Israelites are not so confident that Samson's doing them any favors. Their reaction, what are you up to, Samson? Don't you know that these Philistines, they are over us? And you're going around here provoking them, and that's going to come back on us. What do you think you're doing here? We don't need your help like that, Samson. We're going to tie you up, and we're going to turn you over to the Philistines. Samson said, okay, that'll be fine. You tie me up. Just don't turn on me yourself. And I have to think that the reason Samson said don't turn on me yourselves is because he didn't want to kill his countrymen. Because I think if they had tried to kill him, he would have killed them back. But he said, sure, tie me up, deliver me to the Philistines if that's what you want to do. Just don't do it. Don't turn on me yourselves. And I think he was really saying that for their protection, probably. So they did. They brought him. They bound him with 2 new cords and brought him up from the rock. Verse 14, and when he came to Lehi, the Philistines shouted against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the cords that were on his arms became as flax that was burnt with fire, and his bands loosed from off his hands. And he found a new jawbone of an ass, and put forth his hand, and took it, and slew 1,000 men therewith. And Samson said, with the jawbone of an ass, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of an ass I have slain 1,000 men. And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking, that he cast away the jawbone out of his hand, and called that place Ramath-Lehi. And he was sore athirst, and called upon the Lord, and said, thou hast given this great deliverance to the hand of thy servant, and now shall I die of thirst, and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised. But God clave a hollow place that was in the jaw, and there came water thereout. And when he had drunk, his spirit came again, and he revived. Verse 20, he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. He's famous for that episode too. He killed 1,000. One man killed 1,000 men, and he didn't even have an official weapon to use in the doing of it. You know, if he had this really amazing sword that was sharper than any razor that any man ever knew, and he was a great swordsman, and he was able to, man, if you had the best sword in the world against 1,000 men, he didn't have a sword. He had the jawbone of an ass, and he killed 1,000 men. Now, I just want you to picture this in regards to the strength of Samson. I mean, we all know Samson as a strong man, and that's his reputation, right? A great strong man with long hair. But how strong is strong? Well, that right there may be the teller of his strength, that he could kill 1,000 men single-handedly with not even a real weapon. Pretty incredibly amazing, the strength of Samson. Okay, any thoughts or comments there? Let's keep going. The episode with Delilah, chapter 16. Chapter 16 is the episode with Delilah. Yeah.
I'm thinking too, wasn't there one of the strong men, the mighty men of David? Didn't he kill 300 men or something like that with something like a weapon or something other? I can't remember. But I think the difference here is that they were in battle. And so there was probably thousands of people, and everybody else was fighting, and he was getting but Samson wasn't. Everybody was on him.
It was all against one.
All against one.
Yeah.
And he killed 1,000 men, and they're all against him.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So probably, I would argue, probably the best known episode in Samson's life is Samson and Delilah, right? And that's chapter 16. Samson is notoriously bad at picking women. Would you agree with me about that? We had a lady in the church where we formerly attended, just as sweet as she could be, but she was married to her third husband. The other two had died, but the other two were not really good guys. And then she married this third guy, and he was not a good guy. And I remember one of the other members, we all loved her to death, just sweet as she could be. And he said about picking husbands is not her strong suit. And you'd have to say that about Samson here. Picking women was not his strong suit. He was not good at it. And this business with Delilah, of course, famous situation. And it's bad from the get-go. Chapter 16, verse 1. Then went Samson to Gaza and saw there a harlot and went into her. I mean, from the get-go, I mean, she's a harlot. So this is not good at all. It was told the Gazites, saying, Samson has come hither. And they compassed him in and laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city, and were quiet all the night, saying, in the morning, when it is day, we shall kill him. And Samson lay till midnight, and rose at midnight, and took the doors of the gate of the city, and 2 posts, and went away with them, bar and all, and put them upon his shoulders, and carried them up to the top of the hill that is before Hebron. Excuse me. The harlot in verse 1 is not Delilah per se. That's just a harlot in Gaza. Verse 4, it came to pass afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. I was getting myself ahead of the story here. So he's with a harlot in Gaza. Again, that's a bad situation. God uses it. That's a bad choice on Samson's part, but God uses it to afflict some of the Philistines. And then the story with Delilah begins at verse 4. Again, she's not an Israelite woman. She is of the wrong nationality. He shouldn't be having anything to do with her. We're going to run out of time, but so Delilah intends to betray him, right? And she is told in verse 5, the Lord of the Philistines came to her and said, entice him, see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and we will give thee, every one of us, 1,100 pieces of silver. Wow. I mean, this was talk about a windfall. This was an overwhelming amount of money that was offered to Delilah to find the source of Samson's strength, to learn the secret. How can we bind him and afflict him? Why would they pay that much money? Well, I think the answer to that is because Samson was, you talk about a thorn in their side to the extreme. Samson was all that and more. He was wearing them out every time they. And remember, this wasn't just happening just in a short period of time. We read there at the end of the previous chapter that he'd been judging Israel for 20 years. And so he had just been constantly giving grief to the Philistines. And they want this put to an end. So they have an opportunity with Delilah. Delilah's a bad person. She has corrupt motives. And so she's going to get involved with Samson for the purpose of gaining this money. And so we won't take the time to read it all. But remember, she begs him to tell his strength. And I think the first thing is if you bind me with green cords, I won't be able to break them loose. And so they do that. He falls asleep. They do that, and that doesn't work. And then if you bind me with new ropes, I won't be able to get out of the new ropes. So she lets that be known, and they try it. It doesn't work. I think the next one, about verse 13, he says, if you weave 7 locks of my head with the web, so if you weave my hair in a certain way, I won't have strength, and it doesn't work. So, what's with Samson here at this point? Answer me this question. She has tried to give him away 3 times already. Why does he keep telling her? And why does he ultimately tell her the real solution to his strength? What do you think? Why is he doing that? Anybody? Monty?
A little bit stupid.
Well, I probably could go with that explanation. But Matt?
I think he lets them wear him down, because this is not the first time this has happened. It's happened with the other woman who kept crying and crying and crying, and finally he just gives in. He gets tired of hearing it. Yeah. And that seems to be the case here. Maybe he thought that
he's not good with women. He's just not good with women, period. I think all of that's true. But I'm going to offer one other suggestion. I think he is extremely overconfident. I think he thinks you can't stop me. I don't care what you do. I mean, he believes that he has the personal strength to do whatever he wants to do, and there is no limitation. And so he's just overconfident in the extreme. And so they cut his hair off, and of course he loses his strength. And that's pretty amazing. This is the first time his hair's been cut since he was born, apparently, right? And they cut his hair, and he loses his strength, and he is taken. Now, we remember that when they had captured him, so look at verse 19. This is chapter 6, verse 9. She made him sleep upon her knees. She called for a man, and she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head. And she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. And she said, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awoke out of his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times before and shake myself. He wist not that the Lord was departed from him. So there, I think that is that expression of the kind of overconfidence that he had. Wait.
Do you think that it's revealed before this episode that he knew that his hair was in his strength? Or is this the first time that it's revealed?
Oh, so your question is, did Samson himself know that his strength was in his hair? That's a fair question. I have to believe that he did, but I don't know. I don't think I could put my finger on a verse that says that he did. But, you know, the fact that he finally came around to that explanation makes me think that he knew his strength was in his hair. Eric?
In 17, the beginning, that's what the means told her all his heart. Like, he knew where his strength was.
Yeah, verse 17. That's a good point, Eric. Verse 17 seems to indicate that he did know, and he finally told her all that was in his heart. Good point. All right, so they take him. So the Philistines, now they've got their prize. Verse 20, the Philistines took him, put out his eyes, brought him down to Gaza, bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. Howbeit the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven. The lords of the Philistines gathered themselves together to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their God, and to rejoice, for they said, our God hath delivered Samson our enemy into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, our God hath delivered into our hands our enemy, and the destroyer of our country, which slew many of us. He had been really troubling the Philistines for sure. So it came to pass when their hearts were merry that they said, call for Samson, and he may make us sport. And they called for Samson out of the prison house, and he made them sport, and they set him between the pillars. And Samson said to the lad that held him by the hand, suffer me that I may feel the pillars whereupon the house standeth, that I may lean upon them. And the house was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there. And there were upon the roof about 3,000 men and women that beheld while Samson made sport. And Samson called unto the Lord, said, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, only this once. O God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars upon which the house stood, and on which it was borne up, of the one with his right hand, the other with his left. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords and upon the people that were therein. So the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew at his life. And then his brethren and all the house of the father came down, took him and brought him up, and buried him between Zorar and Estaol, in a burying place that in the burying place of Manoah's father. He judged Israel 20 years. So, of course, we know the end of that story. Even to the very end, Samson is still determined to avenge what has happened to him personally. God uses that, though, and you've got to think that this was real deliverance for the Israelites when all the lords of the Philistines are killed as their pagan temple comes down. This would have been a devastating blow to the Philistine nation. And Samson did what was predicted before his birth, that he would be a deliverer. He would deliver Israel out of the oppression of the Philistines. He did that, but he did that with lots of trouble. He did that with a lot less than personal integrity. But again, I think the takeaway lesson is God can use, even when people are not doing what's right, God can use whatever to bring about his purposes. You can't stop God from his purposes. And the story of Samson probably very well proves that. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.